is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs? But that's called the death panel.
Well, I think, myself personally, I think it's disgusting. Yeah. I feel that they're sort of lambs to the slaughter, to be honest with you.
But that's called the death panel.
Yeah. I feel that they're sort of lambs to the slaughter, to be honest with you.
But that's called the death panel.
Sort of lambs to the slaughter.
But that's called the death panel.
Sort of lambs to the slaughter.
The death panel. The death panel. The death panel.
The death panel.
And you're not supposed to have that discussion. So you, of course,
well, that's an interesting thing you just said, which is just the last 3 months in life for one person or something, because we haven't had a discussion of how to allocate that money. It means we lay off 3 teachers to do so. I mean, in other words, we haven't had this type of allocation.
We're making that trade-off because of huge medical costs that are not examined to see which ones actually have no benefit whatsoever. And because of pension generosity, we will be laying off over 100,000 teachers, which, I'm very much against that. And the whole AFT will agree with me on that.
Last Monday, 31st, my dad sadly lost his fight.
Gisella's father is one of the numbers we keep hearing about, announced from a podium. Last week, 95-year-old Giuseppe died of COVID-19.
England and Wales sees 20,000 excess deaths in care homes. 20,000. $20,000 deaths, eh, Mr. Gates? Yeah, and it isn't by COVID. I don't think it's by COVID. A lot of people who are late 75, 80, 85, 90, 95 even, between those figures. And just like Gates says, they're called the death panel.
But that's called the death panel. But that's called the death panel.
The death panel. He spoke about it. So this is no fucking theory here. He spoke about the death panel. I believe that a lot of old people have been wiped off this planet, not literally by someone's hands holding round the neck by strangulation or a pillow shoved over the face, but by other means by the state to get rid of old people. And I do believe that, which Gates spoke about before, save a lot of money.
Is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs?
Why get rid of some teachers, paying pensioners and all that business? Just eradicate a lot of the old people in this pandemic. It's come for many good uses, hasn't it, this pandemic? Eradicate a lot of old people.
The death rate from the bug has fallen considerably in recent weeks. Most of the really vulnerable people have already died. The authorities have successfully cleaned out care homes and exterminated a good chunk of the population receiving pensions. I wonder how much money that has saved the Treasury. Right from the start of this absurd and entirely unnecessary process of putting people under house arrest, it was the elderly who were the first to be locked up, or locked in if you prefer. For absolutely no good reason, the elderly were told that they had to stay in their own homes to protect themselves, hospitals, and the world. There was never one shred of evidence for this. On the contrary, it was clear from the start that this cruelty was based on political expediency rather than scientific necessity. Men and women over 70 were told that they couldn't see their loved ones, and many were told that they would be refused medical treatment, whatever might be wrong with them. People who died, for whatever reason, died alone, abandoned by a system they'd helped to create and pay for. And it was all total bollocks. I haven't forgotten, by the way, about my charge of murder I'll come to that soon.
But that's called the death panel.
But before I do, I just want to say a few more things about the way the elderly have been abused during all this unscientific bullying and blatant discrimination.
But that's called the death panel.
And it was and is discrimination. Just imagine the fuss there would have been in the posh papers if it had been announced that all homosexuals or women or Methodists were to be put under house arrest. Imagine the fuss if governments had, more sensibly, announced that everyone overweight had to stay indoors to protect the health services. That would at least have had the merit of being logical. The elderly were, in many parts of the world at least, denied all medical care. Many were manipulated into signing "do not resuscitate" forms,
But that's called the death panel.
effectively signing their own suicide notes. By being locked away for longer than anyone else, their immune systems were weakened. Many, without internet access, had real difficulty in obtaining food supplies because, despite its promises, their government made virtually no effort to ensure that the elderly received food.
But that's called the death panel.
The elderly were told that they couldn't see their families. The big lie was that this was to protect the hospitals, though no one even tried to explain why this should be. And the nonsense was highlighted by the fact that in some areas, the elderly were told that they wouldn't be treated in hospital whatever was wrong with them.
But that's called the death panel.
None of this was a real surprise, of course. The elderly have been demonized by the media for a long time. They've been blamed for poverty, the weather, and anything else you can think of, despite having worked and paid taxes all their lives.
Is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs?
Governments see the elderly as worthless and an expensive drain on society. If you doubt that, just look at the sentences given to thugs who attack the elderly. Mug a 40-year-old and you'll be punished severely. Mug an 80-year-old and you'll get a light slap on the wrist, at worst. And so we're now at the nitty-gritty, the murder charge. Some of you may suspect that I'm exaggerating, a little hyperbole to draw attention to a small problem. You'd be wrong if you thought that. The fact is that throughout the world, countless thousands of elderly patients with the coronavirus were thrown out of hospitals and dumped in care homes. Now, let's pause a moment. What sort of people are you likely to find in care homes? A, fit young folk. B, fit old folk. C, sick old folk. It is not difficult, is it? You don't go into a care home unless you're elderly, frail and in need of some care and attention because you're probably suffering from a range of health problems. And so, hospitals sent patients with the coronavirus into care homes which were full of frail elderly patients with health problems, the very people who often die of the flu. Every winter, no one would ever dream of sending a patient with the flu into a care home, but hospitals sent thousands of coronavirus patients into care homes. The staff in the care homes had no equipment or facilities for isolating the patients who came from the hospital with the the coronavirus, for isolating them from the patients who didn't have it, but who were already ill with respiratory problems, heart problems, or whatever. And guess what happened next? Well, you don't need a medical degree to work it out. Thousands of elderly, frail people in care homes caught the coronavirus, and because no one would or could treat them, they died in droves.
But that's called the death panel.
Negligence in the care of the elderly in these homes has been widely reported. Stories that would make anyone with a heart weep and feel a deep, undying fury. Look at the figures. In Ireland, Norway, France and Belgium, more than half of all the coronavirus deaths were in care homes. In the UK and Sweden, over a third of coronavirus deaths were in care homes.
But that's called the death panel.
Wasn't it an amazing coincidence that hospitals all over the world did the same stupid thing? All dumped coronavirus patients in care homes. For governments everywhere, this had the bonus of pushing up the total death rates, so providing some justification for the otherwise unjustifiable lockdowns and the utterly stupid and scientifically indefensible social distancing nonsense. We all know that governments have been doing everything they can to push up the total number of coronavirus deaths by, for example, listing patients as having died of the coronavirus when they actually died with it. Two very different things. At this point, we have to ask a simple question. Were the old people with the coronavirus sent into care homes through stupidity and incompetence, or deliberately to kill off a lot of other old people? The answer to this question will only matter when the hospital staff responsible are taken to court and tried, as I sincerely hope they will be. If they sent sick old people with the coronavirus into care homes through stupidity and incompetence, then they'll probably get away with a manslaughter charge. Even if they erroneously expected their hospitals to be filled with younger coronavirus patients, that's still no excuse. But if they deliberately sent old people with the coronavirus into care homes, knowing that other residents would catch the bug and die, and you'd have to be pretty stupid not to realise that, then the charge will be murder. And we're looking at a mass murder charge of which even the Nazis might be ashamed. The added bonus charge, by the way, is that most of the elderly people who were sent to care homes with the coronavirus had caught the bloody thing in hospital. Because, as everyone knows, or should know, most hospitals are so badly managed these days that they are the one place in the world where you're most likely to catch a deadly bug. In a way, it doesn't really matter whether it was stupidity, incompetence, panic, a lack of care, or homicide. The fact is that umpteen thousand old people died before they should have died.
But that's called the death panel.
And the hospitals which sent them to their death were largely left half empty because the expected hordes of coronavirus patients never turned up. The patients who died in care homes died alone with no family or spiritual support. The only people around them ludicrously dressed as though for a space flight. The hospitals, hordes of advisors and politicians who allowed it to happen, and who recklessly created the circumstances, are all guilty and shouldn't be allowed to get away with their crimes, whether they be crimes of omission or commission. We live in rich societies, and those responsible for caring didn't care. They dumped the elderly like bags of garbage. The people who were responsible for this Holocaust will probably whinge, wring their hands and say, "Oh, we were just doing what we were told to do." We've heard that excuse before, half a century or so ago, and it didn't work then, and it won't work now. I'll be campaigning for all those responsible to be tried in court.
That's my mum here now. 2 days ago, when one of the nurses here, she said to me, "Your mum's suffering. I can put her out of her misery." What did you say? How do you do that, love? We can give her some stuff, morphine, and your mum will slip away peacefully. I had to say to her, excuse my language, are you guys for real? That's murder. You're not going to do that to my mum. I'll protect my mum. Next day, I've got another one saying, "You're cruel. You're keeping your mum. Her lungs have got pneumonia, and she's 73. She's not going to make it. We can easily give her a mix, and your mum will sleep away nicely." Sleep away nicely to where? She won't be coming back. Don't tell me that again, because you don't know. Don't tell me that again. I spoke to the head doctor today, and the head doctor assures me that everything that his staff do comes from him. So I said to him, "Sir, they want to give my mum some stuff that will take my mum's life." And he says to me, "Zach, but surely you see your mum suffering." Hold up, this is England, this is UK, United Kingdom. It's illegal to euthanize somebody. And they're saying they want to give my mum this concoction. So just now, I just thought I'd just trick this nurse. So I did. And I said to the nurse, "Can you please turn up the oxygen?" Because they've turned the oxygen down on my mum's breathing. Because they want us to do this. And they keep going on at my brothers and sisters. And they've caused, there's 5 of us, And they've caused a little major mayhem. Because they're telling a couple of them, my mum's suffering. So some of them are saying, Zach, we've got to let mum go. Hold up. I'm a middle child. Do you know what they say, middle child syndrome? Don't play with me. Because this middle child has a temper. He has a rage like you could never imagine. I am cool with you. Oh, you guys know I'm a cool dude. Come to my mum, my daughters. I have a rage. Don't play with them. The doctor says to me, Zach, don't you think your mum is going through some stress? Why don't you just... I say, my friend, what do you mean? The nurses have spoken and they've told you that we can just let your mum go. Within an hour, she can be slipped away. I said, tell him, my friend, don't mention that to me again. It's the third time you mention it to me. You know they say third time lucky? Fourth time will be unlucky. Just now, this woman come with the same bullshit. I said to her, so what do you want me to do? If she's stressing, what do you want me to do? She goes, I can give her... I said, go on then. She says, right, and she actually went in the drawer to go and get this stuff to euthanize my mum. To euthanize my mum.
I haven't forgotten, by the way, about my charge of murder.
But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to have that discussion.